Now joining us over the phone is Laraaji, calling in from New York City. Laraaji's got a bunch of performances coming up this year on his website. You can go to laraaji.blogspot.com to find out more about that. Laraaji, thanks so much for speaking with me this morning.
Beautiful, Sam.
On your website, it says that you have celestial music performances and laughter play shops coming up, and you have a bunch of dates booked all across the U.S. Can you tell me a little bit about what those performances will entail?
Yes, the music performances tend toward deep listening or celestial sound immersion. Some of them will be collaborations with on a shared bill with other artists. The music that I'm doing currently, or the music that's doing me, is electric, acoustic, zither-based music, improvisation, and inspired by images that are spontaneously received in the slight meditative trance. Also music that is inspired by contemplation of creative imagery, anywhere from imaginary civilizations dancing, or angels wafting in the sky, or the human physical system operating, blood moving, or five elements like the movement of water, air, space, earth, fire. So I use a variety of imagery or resources to inspire this improvisational music. Lately, within the past few years, I've been able to tackle one of my growing joys, and that is working with gong music, mounted gong, large gongs. And that is a unique experience of working with gongs that are not necessarily high-end or symphonic, but when I'm supplied a gong in a concert of any quality, I can relate to it and put it through electronics. The same way we're working with zither, putting it through interesting electronics to create ambient sound or tonescapes, interesting listening experience.
What's the technique like for playing the gong?
Using various mallets to evoke certain sounds from the gong. Technique is using anything that I can do to get sound to come from the gong. My early technique was just to strike it with a large mallet and let it swell. But now using different mallets, anywhere from soft, big, round sticks, metallic objects, and to let the swell enter a microphone, and the microphone goes through treatments. So the technique is to, one, physically to get into a flow, body flow, usually inspired by something like a Tai Chi or slow meditative movement with the body language, and breathing and finding the rhythm of my breath that allows me to enter a gong tone, strike the gong, and let it swell. And another aspect of the technique is the imagination, to image what I call vertical space. In other words, if I'm in a concert hall, I'm not necessarily in the concert hall when I'm playing. And I can image timeless cosmic field that I'm at times imagine that I'm playing a tone that someone in the field is hearing for the first time, as if the field's just totally silent and my sounds are waking consciousness up to its own presence. So the technique is involving body language, breath, and the imagination, and a variety of mallets. One of my latest mallets fun is something called flumies. They're friction mallets that one rubs on the metallic gong surface to create sensations of moaning or whales crying or just interesting vibrational sounds. All of this getting back to the idea of the gong is a vibrational instrument and letting vibrational sound be the performance. It is the actual center of the communication.
You're going to be appearing with guitarist Jonathan Wilson in Boston on March 10th at the Sinclair.
That's the idea. I'll be doing a tour of 3 dates here in the United States. That format will be most likely my opening for Jonathan with a 30 to 40 minute solo performance with electric zither. Those concerts, I don't know if a gong will be convenient, but electric zither, kalimba, which is African thumb piano, and my voice. And at some point during the performance, Jonathan, who has a new album out called Rare Birds, which features a song on which he had me play called Loving You. So during that performance, the chances are that I will also join him in improvising around his song, Loving You.
The performance is going to be March 10th at the Sinclair in Cambridge. How did that collaboration start with you performing or playing with Jonathan?
Sam, that started about 3 or 4 years ago when myself and my lady partner friend, Arji Oshiananda, were invited to play at the Cine Family, a theater in Los Angeles, and also to do a laughter workshop at that same venue within the space of 2 days. And Jonathan caught that concert, and he seemed to be quite struck with my approach to performance, especially with the electric zither. And he approached me to, well, he was visiting New York City sometime after that to come and check out his concert performance and to go into a studio and jam with him. And I guess the result of the jam was to convince him that we could do things together in a collaborational sense. And since then, I've caught his performances, especially he's traveling with Stephen Waters, I guess, right now. And when I visit California, we usually get together and hang out in his studio and lay down tracks.
In the 1970s, when you lived in New York City, your original goal was to be a comedian?
My goal was to get people into the laughter zone because I believe so much in the healing force of laughter. And I did practice stand-up comedy, writing comedy, some TV commercial comedy, though I did have an agent and a manager for a while. But my direction in stand-up comedy was going somewhere, but I became disenchanted with the idea of a career that was going to expand into what I saw as nightclubs with cigarette smoke, late hours, and aloneness. And also my material was coming under question, mainly by me, that the material I was using was more polarizing humor, which is natural for humor. You make fun of things and people. But at the same time, I was also studying the laws of consciousness. And I started feeling that the kind of humor I was doing in the approach to comedy was not in harmony with the highest in my life. So eventually the comedy swelled into doing more music and eventually got back to sharing my love for laughter by actually directing laughter workshops starting in the mid-'80s, getting people into their therapeutic side of laughter, heavy body laughter, heavy breathing laughter, laughter that releases a lot of the health benefits, medically documented health benefits of our laughter.
Tell me more about how those laughter workshops work.
Well, let's take, there could be two approaches. One, if I'm conducting a laughter workshop for a very yogic, meditative, friendly population, I will open up with a guided laugh, call and response, chanting for about 10 or 15 minutes. Then we go into exploring 6 or 7 different laughter sizes, laughter exercises that allow the participant to explore the impact of their own laughing voice onto their endocrine system or their internal body, from the head to the throat to the chest, heart, abdominal organs, lungs, and even smiling. We explore aspects of the laughing experience so that eventually in the workshop or play shop, which I like to use now, the participant gets to lay down and explore these internal exercises to take them toward a shavasana-like state or a deep meditative state, which happens when we do heavy laughter. It relaxes us into a place of natural meditation. And during the long meditative section of the workshop, I and myself and a partner will move around the space with various instruments, inviting sounds and tones from the instrument to complement that meditative deep relaxation state. Then, after a period of silence, invite the participants back into the body with a grounding happy foot dance, just to be sure everybody is back in the body. And those workshops can go anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours, 3 hours in the case of serious long workshops or conferences. And generally there are from anywhere from 16 participants up to 30, up to 80, and as many as 200 in Australia once at the Opera House. Everyone leaves, not everyone, maybe one or two will leave a little confused about what was that all about.
Yeah.
And others leave really delighted that they can reconnect with a laughter that they're familiar with. And others get to laugh more than they knew they were psychologically and emotionally ready to laugh at this juncture in their life.
When did you acquire your first zither?
My first zither, Sam, was acquired in a pawn shop in Queens, New York in 1974. And this was after actually imaging myself playing an instrument that would be lighter than a Fender Rhodes piano, which was what I was playing at that time with a jazz rock group. So this particular day, I was pawning a guitar that I wasn't using much at that time in my professional life. And in the guitar, in the pawn shop window, was a zither, known as an auto harp as well. While entering the pawn shop with my guitar, my whole focus was to come out of that pawn shop with $175.
Yeah.
And the clerk offered me only $25 for this Martin's fiberglass case and this Yamaha 6-string guitar. And instantly upon hearing the clerk's response from within my own presence, head or whatever, a very distinct voice guiding me to swap my guitar for the auto harp in the window. And the voice was so distinct and clear and so real, and yet so warm and loving, like a wise cosmic counselor, that I wanted to see what this was all about. Where did the voice come from, and how does it know that I would be interested in a zither? And I swapped in the store for the auto harp zither and $5. And I left and went home. I was living in Queens at the time. And I began exploring my favorite open tunings from the guitar into the auto harp, and also my favorite jazz chords. I would experiment with locking the tunings into the auto harp and using the meditative approach of just hanging out with a harmonic field for an extended period of time and let it show me what's in it. And I learned from that experience that one harmonic feel, just like meditation, the deeper I go into it, the more juice, the more subtle juice, the more stories, the more energies and information there is. So that began my exploring the zither, and that was my first zither. And it started out as an acoustic zither, and eventually I learned that I could electrify it, and that allowed me to play on the sidewalks of Queens and Brooklyn and Manhattan in the late 70s and early 80s.
When you were busking at those times, was it mostly improvisation, or were you writing compositions as well?
Well, at that time, I didn't know that what I was doing was called busking until I heard people from Europe describe what I was doing. But my compositions at that time were spontaneous expressions. Like I would go into semi-trance and connect with an extended field, whether not just a field around New York, but a cosmic field. And I would interact with the field. Also, I was working with five elements at the time, interacting in my imagination with water energy, basically oceanic energy. What guided me to use oceanic energy is that I understood that oceans are the neutralizers of our planetary energy field. And I felt that if I could bring energy, whether I could act the sense of an ocean while I'm at the zither, that the music that would result would be music that would have a neutralizing effect on the listener. So the only amount of actually hands-on composing that I do for the zither is I'll map out the tuning. I'll work sometimes days, weeks to fine-tune a harmonic field, 36 strings, that have a beautiful, groovy, emotional message. And once I get it and I work with it at home to find the different spaces within this tuning. Some tunings might evoke the sense of a desert, or evoke the sense of what you call early America, or another sense of some otherworldly civilization. And when I find those sweet spots, usually I'll look for at least 7 sweet spots within a zither harmonic field and know how to work them. And then when I go into performing them, it's improvisational approach. I'll bring forth those sweet spots and whatever else gets revealed in the course of the improvisation. So unless I'm working with a dance company where I'll have a set structure through which to unfold my music to support a dance, the music is loosely or freely improvised with the structure of having those sweet spots ready and having imageries to guide me through the performance of the composition.
You mentioned neutralizing the listener. Do you identify with the terms ambient or new age music today?
I do, but kind of loosely, because once backstage before performance, my intention is to drop into meditation, do some preparation exercises, and then let the energies guide the music through. So you could call it celestial ambient, omni-ambient, or new age. I relate to that because I feel I am channeling music that was not accessible in, let's say, 100 years ago. That is music that's using electronics, or music that is traveling with an electronics zither allows me to do something on the edge of a one-person orchestra. So, in other words, creating or channeling a big orchestral symphonic sound into remote venues on the planet. So that's a New Age listening experience. And I relate again to the New Age term in terms of the listener, that we have a New Age listening market emerging on the planet that is more and more individuals who have experienced deep shavasana or deep meditative relaxation and can relate to deep listening music that allows the listener to be in a semi-trance state and to experience a higher, more transcendental mode of self. And ambient, I relate to ambient after many years of not being very clear what ambient is. And I have to say that I have to own my own direction of ambient, whether I call it cosmic ambient or celestial ambient or contemplative ambient music, as opposed to noise music or boisterous music or a very chaotic music that can overwhelm the listener in a direction away from what I would prefer would be a meditative, healing, nervous system calming music. So an ambient feel music would be a music that presents sound as a field, an environment within which the listener can either focus on the music or just drift into their own agenda, whether it be thinking or relaxation or imagery or even working as a healing practitioner in a clinic.
So you're performing one day in the 70s on the street and you meet Brian Eno.
Yes, that day was actually an evening in Washington Square Park in New York City. A nice, beautiful late summer evening. And there I am, Sam, in the northeast corner of Washington Square Park, set up on the ground with a mat and my electric zither, going through a simple amplification. That was the early stages of my zither exploration. Playing with my eyes closed, so it's similar to yoga posture in a semi-meditative trance. And after doing my improvisational performance that evening to a crowd circled around me there in Washington Square Park, I packed my zither, counting my funds money earned, and in that case that evening was a spontaneous note from Mr. Brian Eno asking me to contact him in reference to a project that he was embarking on, that his ambient music series. So the very next day I contacted him, got together, we talked over related subject matter, which led us to agreeing to go into a local studio right there on Green Street in the Village and begin recording the compositions that are in the album Day of Radiance, Ambient number 3.
Were you at all familiar with his work at that time?
No, I was not. As a matter of fact, a month before he approached me, some people at my performance were encouraging me to research Fripp and Eno. It was the first time I ever heard the word Eno. I didn't know what they were talking about, Fripp and Eno. And they were sincere, and they really thought that if I checked out the music, I would find kindred spirits. But before I had the time to comfortably do that, Brian Eno shows up.
And when he starts to talk to you about his ambient series, it relates to what you want to do and relate to his ideas?
Frankly, no.
Oh, okay.
I think I was doing what he called ambient, but I've never heard the word ambient.
Okay.
And that's one thing. When starts to explain it, then I get into the head, and the music that I do doesn't necessarily come through the head. But to oblige him, I said, here's an opportunity to grow. And few of the things he was saying about ambient is that it's more of a field. It's not about creating music for people to actually listen to, but a field within which people can be and move. And I caught pieces of what he was saying, enough to go into a studio and allow him to coach me in the studio in a direction that he was seeking. So it took me a couple of years to wrap my my brain around the term ambient. But I felt like what I was doing was in that ballpark.
What was he like in the studio? Did he just set up and just let you just do whatever you wanted, basically? Or did, like you said, did he coach you a little bit?
Coached me a little bit, and the biggest thing, which was very little but very big for me, was he allowed me to rely more on high-end microphones than my electronic pickup on the zither. He allowed me to capture more crystal pristine range of the instrumental sound by the use of the microphones, and he didn't do much like pushing me in a particular direction, but just let me go. And what happens usually in a studio, I'll record 3 times more than what we're looking for and then edit out the best 1 or 2/3. But in the case of that particular studio, we found out that the meditative tracks were not usable because somehow machine sounds from the other parts of that building were getting onto the tracks. But the energetic tracks, the hammered zither works, were usable. And in the studio, he advised me to lay a track over that. So you're actually hearing me layered zither on the hammered dance sides of that album. He also invited me to participate in the early production side of the album, choosing the graphics for the album cover, which was a unique experience. So he allowed me pretty much a hands-on experience in the early stages of that album's production. One thing I mentioned, I tend to forget, is that it was easy to be in a laughing mode with Brian, that we get into joking, kibitzing, and laughing a lot. That's one thing that tends our meeting and hanging out together.
So he was a fun guy to work with.
Yes, fun and, needless to say, highly intelligent and worldly wise.
So you said that it took you a few years to embrace the term ambient, but how do you feel now about being part of that ambient series, that it's known as being the ambient series?
Well, I feel like it's allowed me to make space for things other than meditative ambient or contemplative ambient. And I'm sharing the field with artists who are bringing their own energies and life experiences into the game of ambient music. Ambient. I hear music at times that I would never have called ambient, and that was because of my limited understanding of what ambient is. If you can use sound to bring forth a sonic or sound field, then that field serves as an environment for a listener, and it makes sense to them, and it serves them in their moment of evolving. That's ambient for them. And so today I have a more expansive sense of the umbrella under which the ambient music is coming forth.
Sometimes the music buying public needs almost a label to put on things to embrace it, even if you didn't understand or at the time maybe what ambient meant.
Yes, alternative music was another one. Experimental music. My simple word for it is groovy and beautiful.
Yeah.
But there's no section in the record store.
Right.
Groovy and beautiful. But the New Age, people tend to go to New Age to find my music, and that's okay. It's a handle. Some would call it alternative listening, but that could be confusing. But New Age is where people who I kind of can relate to go. People whose lifestyles are very friendly with New Age practices, whether they're meditation or healing or
Tai Chi or visionary work or New Age consciousness, that that area of listeners who tend to gravitate toward the term New Age, and also open heart, loving, planetary service, green thinkers, experimental civilization visionaries who can relate to the term New Age, and it isn't a hokey term for them. So it's a place where people that I relate to very warmly can go to. They can go to the New Age section in the record store and find me, and I can find them.
Well, head over to laraaji.blogspot.com to find out the dates of when he's going to be appearing over the next few months. He's going to be in Boston on March 10th at the Sinclair in Cambridge, appearing with Jonathan Wilson. Laraaji, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me, and good luck with your appearances this year.
Thank you, Sam, and happy eternity. Peace.